Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and today with a bit of a video, just want to go over the Balance Manifesto that came out yesterday. Just a few little talking points and thoughts on each sort of section, maybe some stuff inside the sections. The patch notes are already out, but I won't be doing those until later in the evening tonight, when I'll have some wine, some cheese, loosen up a bit, and get through all of the patch notes. So I'm gonna go over this manifesto with you without any knowledge of the patch notes as thus far anyway. So yeah, if you want to watch that, by all means, you can have my opinion on a bunch of these manifesto notes. So let's get into it. The difference between manifesto and patch notes are basically actual specific just examples of things that are changing, exact sort of notes about them, the exact change that's happening, whereas manifesto is more an overarching reason as to why things are changing, how they're changing, and the choices behind those. So typically they do sometimes like to shake up the meta, and even if you just nerf a few of the top skills, the meta might get shaken up quite a lot, because all of a sudden a lot of other things get brought to the forefront that didn't really have any relevancy in the past. So it can only take a few little tweaks here or there to kind of shift the entire game in another direction and feel completely different. This time around, they're trying to go for a pretty big sweep of making things slower, so getting rid of a bunch of movement speed from certain things, making flasks a bit tougher to use and to sustain, and the idea is to not really sustain flasks all the time ever anymore. As well as that, there's some damage nerfs to some of the more common and boring skill gems, or support gems rather, not skill gems, so that you might make some more interesting choices. As far as I can tell, just as a before you get into any of this, too long didn't watch sort of thing, for the most part, I think a lot of builds are actually going to be kind of untouched, and even though it might seem like a 20 to 40% nerf, in many different directions, some builds don't really use that many of the pure damage gems, already use a lot of utilities, and won't really see too much of a nerf through many of these things. It's just kind of the top end of speed and the top end of certain pure damage scaling that might get affected. So with that said, what they're saying here is they're going to reduce play damage at higher levels, but that's through those kind of support nerfs, and then raising monster life at lower levels, just to make it a bit tougher to begin with, though I think that's still only going to be like Act 1 for now, and more of an experimental thing for the future, I think. So support gem reduction. So basically a lot of the just boring support gems that are, melee fizz, for example, 50% more melee damage, with no real downside, something like that is going to be toned down to like 38% or some shit, 35, something like that, so that you can then start to look at gems that do something additional, but they only have like 25 to 30% damage, and maybe start using some of those. So even something like Melee Fizz, supposedly not really getting too nerfed, but a 10% less attack speed slapped onto it as well, so that you're kind of making a choice between hitting harder and a bit less attack speed, similar to what Pulverize already does. And it's pretty worth using Pulverize. So that might not really change too much, especially in builds that are focusing on just a big heavy bleed to begin with. You don't really care about attack speed there anyway. But yeah, possibly the higher end of some of these builds are going to be down by like 20 to 40%. We'll have to wait and see exactly how that plays out, even regardless of the patch notes. It's kind of, there's always a bunch of extra power creep from like league to league, from year to year, and then occasionally it's brought back, and this is a pretty big bring back, but chances are we'll still be pretty fucking powerful, and chances are there's still going to be really powerful builds out there that don't really feel any of these effects. So they're doing that to a bunch of little gems and stuff like Barrage, number of projectile bow support, Barrage, GMP, chain haven't been changed. So basically some of the bow stuff hasn't been changed throughout reading these notes, and some have even been slightly better. So it's not really getting a buff for bows as much, it's just that some things are going to be nerfed, and thus bows will look less shit by comparison. So let's just say everything's up here, bows are like down here. Nothing really changed here, but this might come back down here. So the bows are more competitive, just because they have had less affected by these nerfs. Traps, likewise, there's been a few little adjustments to trap supports and traps where they're going to scale a bit better. So traps as a playstyle is a pretty weak one right now, especially with the way mine's got revamped. It just feels like a better trapping system. So it might be more of a meta now, given that some of these will be pretty damn powerful and do a lot of extra damage. So trapping stuff is definitely something to look out for. Might actually be worth playing. Some things actually still got buffed though randomly. So something like Ground Slam got a bigger damage base effectiveness for some reason, I guess. And that means things like Hollow Palm should be thicker with it because it's just scaling yet additional damage onto the gem a lot better. So there's some good things like that. Seismic Cry got a huge nerf. So instead of like giving you more damage per consequential attack with your Seismic Cry, it now just gives area. So it's going to be very niche, just basically only using it if you're already stacking some war cries and have an available button to press and want some more clear speed. But otherwise, it got pretty damn dumpstered. Critical damage support is actually been brought up quite a bit. So with the quality on it, it's 150 crit multi, which is pretty damn substantial. It's one of those gems that was always hardly used by anything and hardly justifiably used by anything because it was like 100 crit multi or so, and most builds get about 300, 400, 500 crit multi, and you can only really justify using it if it's giving you like 40% more damage when there's so many other good supports out there. So in this case, you'll be able to use it if you have a build that has like 300 crit multi and it's struggling to get much more. Then this damage support will end up being like 50% more damage in the end. And that is for things like a Wander. It's typically been hard to get like crit multi, but these days that's less of a problem. You can just get crit multi just by brute forcing it. That said, can actually be a support that's usable these days if you want to forego stacking crit multi elsewhere. For some reason they toned down awakened support gems, so they brought those in as like this next level of min-maxing onto your character. Your character's level, 95 or whatever, has level 20 gems, not much else you can do. Then they gave us support gems in awakened form, so they do slightly more than the previous gems, and they're bringing those back a bit, I think at the lower end, but maybe at level 5 it sounds like some of them maybe are still going to be about the same, so that just makes the min-max more important. But it's a bit of a weird change, to be honest. Though they are obviously powerful, and some way more powerful than their normal versions. I'm still a bit surprised that, they introduced this as a way to do extra min-max and stuff, and then they're like, hold on, that's probably too good. So I guess that's what happened there. Archmage got pretty damn gutted, so damn near half effectiveness from before, but that said, Archmage was kind of a stupid support in my opinion. It was a very lazy way of just like fixing almost any build or any skill that didn't really function too well on its own. You'd be like, oh, okay, stack mana, get Archmage, and all of a sudden, there you go, viable. So in this case, it's probably only going to be really quite good on things that truly shine with it and already have some good strong synergies. And yeah, not really that one-stop shop to just slap and fix anything. I know some people probably be upset by this, but I think that's a fine change personally, because I thought Archmage was a bit silly. Changed some quality bonuses that just seem a bit more thematic, a bit less damage-based, so GMP now does projectile damage instead of attack speed, since I guess it's too easy to get more attack speed from it. Chaining range on chain instead of proj speed, which is a nice change because you don't really typically need more proj speed, and chain range is always nice to have. And then, yeah, fast proj, whatever. We then have something actually being done about the Flask system for the first time in quite a long time. So the Flask system right now is essentially press 2, 3, 4, 5 over and over again, maintaining flasks, and that is where a lot of people's wrists get quite damaged. Mine is no exception. And especially if you're a CI build, pure energy shield, you have 5 flasks and you're typically going 1 through 5, 1 through 5 over and over again. It's a pretty shitty playstyle. And they're trying to combat that in some way. I'm not sure it's going to be 100% successful in that regard, but we'll see how it plays out. So they're trying to combat that by making flasks a bit more decisively pressable. So some are going to have longer duration and less charges, or less, uptime through having more charges used when you're using it, and some are just gonna like not get charges back but be more powerful while they're used, thanks to some of the extra orb stuff that they did. So gains no charges during flask effect, but huge extra duration. Their example here is in a coruscating elixir, which is a pretty bad example if you ask me, because a coruscating elixir that can't be 100% uptime is basically a worthless item, since it's already kind of hard to keep this up and justify using it over just a pure low life build with shavs or some shit. Since if it's not up 100% of the time, chances are you died in some chaos at some point. I've tried doing this flask in this build and it felt garbage, even with really good uptime. I think now you can do it better, but with this change here, it'll, I don't know, that won't feel good for a coruscating. Either way, there are a few things they are trying to do to combat this whole flask system. There'll be some new passives on the tree to, give you extra duration. You're going to get less flask charges from monsters. There's a whole bunch of shit that is being done that should at least, maybe make some more meaningful choices in our flask pressing and hopefully stimmy us away from just mindless spam. Another big one is the adrenaline mod on your Quicksilver flask that you usually do for 20 to 30% extra movement speed is now down to 6 to 8. Bit of a weird change. I mean, getting rid of it, fair enough, I understand that, but just taking it down to 6 to 8 feels a bit weird, because that is really just like kind of useless. Maybe you'll still roll it if you've got nothing else to put in your Quicksilver and you still want to use a Quicksilver, which you probably do because it's still 40% movement speed. But otherwise, 6 to 8 is just, it feels so small. Yeah. As far as enduring mana flasks, chances are you probably won't be using them too much for heavy mana consumption on like spell builds that really chunk a lot of mana, but they're still going to be pretty damn useful for melee builds that don't have an easy fix for their mana and want to use enduring mana flask. I've had a few of those in the past, but it isn't very common. You do usually try and fix your mana through some mana leech, minus mana cost, that sort of shit, but I think they'll still have a small place somewhere. Player ailment mitigation. So currently, it's probably a bit too easy to just get immunity to some ailments, like, immunity to freeze, chill, shock, whatever, and they're trying to do that, a bit more methodically as well. So I think they went over that in the announcement live stream, but yeah, things like, Ignite immune on your flask won't really be a thing. It'll instead just get rid of Ignite, which is still fine for the Ignite portion stuff, because there's not too many Ignites that actually hit you and you need to be purely immune from them. You can just wipe them away and then neutralize the main threat there, since it's like one big Ignite, nothing else happening after, that type of thing. But they're also going to be doing things like the Raider now grants 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments, instead of full elemental ailment immunity. So it doesn't completely just get rid of, needing to do any of that, but it gets you a step closer to getting immune, since there will be some other ways of still doing this, stacking through the tree, but it's going to be harder to do, because it is pretty damn powerful. So I guess that kind of makes sense, but they also mentioned that Elementalist and Inquisitor won't have that at all, which is a pretty big kick in the nuts to a couple of my favorite Ascendancies. Inquisitors, I still think are very powerful and still going to be very powerful, but it is a bit of a weird change just because the rest of the player base doesn't agree that Inquisitors are that powerful, and they're not that commonly played or well represented on the higher end. But I think it's still mostly okay. Inquisitor, I mean, I'm still going to make plenty. It's just going to feel slightly worse not getting the ailment immunity there. And Elementalist, that will feel a bit worse too, but I think there's still plenty of reason to make Elementalists, so it's not the worst change in the world for that one either. And then this is actually going to be kind of nice. There might be ways to mitigate Bleed, Corrupt Blood, and Curses through the passive tree, which might actually be useful and, save us some investment in our flaskage and stuff, and have a slightly different way of building and playstyle with that. So that one I'm actually kind of interested to see how it plays out. Poison had a pretty big revamp. Not a big revamp itself. It now deals 50% more damage, and then they're trying to like shy away from having Assassin just be that much better for certain poison builds than everything else, and likewise relying so much on this Flask. So after looking at all of these changes for the poison thing, I'd say Pathfinder is still looking pretty damn good for poison. As far as I can tell, it got a small nerf, and then this Flask got kind of some of its power redirected from duration to just chaos damage over time multi, sorry. But it got rid of Perfect Agony. I think Pathfinder will still be pretty damn strong. I think Assassin will be strong up to a certain point, sort of more of a niche strongness. So they capped the amount of duration you can get on your poison up to about 100. And I'd say most conventional Assassin builds don't really utilize more than 100% anyway. It's only the ones that use lots and lots and lots of hits that stack it, that abuse it pretty powerfully, that go higher than that. So I think a lot of builds won't be too affected, but some definitely will be. Overall, I think they'll still have good poison utility, but I think the Pathfinder's looking quite a bit better at the moment. That's my understanding of it. Ailment threshold is something I really like the look of. So basically, they're going to give us exactly the amount that we are shocked by, chilled by, etc., and also the amount that the enemy is done by. So you can see this person here is shocked for 50%, so that's 50% increased damage taken, whereas this monster is shocked for 11%, so your shock is only providing 11% increased damage taken to the enemy. That is really nice to be able to see finally, so you know that if you're building heavily into shock, if you're getting to that 30% threshold or so on the enemy once and for all, or if you're building into your overshock and it goes up to 60%, you'll know if you're actually getting value out of that and using it, as opposed to just assuming you do. They are then trying to combat a little bit of the sort of real brainless one-stop shop playstyle of triggered spells and stuff with just a bit of negative downside in that your triggered spells will now cost mana. So previously with your cast on crit, if you just have your spells attached to your cyclone, you crit with your cyclone, you're just going to shit out a bunch of spells at no cost to you, whereas now you will be paying the cost for those spells. I'd say in some cases and for some builds that will be a bit of a shake-up. You'll have to reserve less mana. You might have to actually focus on your mana a bit, maybe the mana flask sort of stuff, and it will maybe just mean a bit less damage because you won't be quite fully invested in damage with the last bit of your mana and all that. Some builds I don't think will really matter at all, and of course, as they mentioned, Mjolnir, for example, doesn't require you to pay the costs, so that makes Mjolnir pretty damn strong still, but typically Mjolnir has a setup in its actual weapon for attacking, and then also a cast on crit setup in like your chest or so, so you'll still have to pay that mana cost, but you'll only be dealing with like one mana cost instead of double there. So it is interesting. I think for a lot of things, it should still be viable and you should still be able to build around it, but it's going to be just a bit more thought there, a bit less streamlined, maybe, is the word I'm looking for. I think that will still be okay, as long as, you know, we see how it goes and figure out how much mana we're truly in need of shitting out for these builds. But some builds, you know, stack a lot of mana regen with cast on crit, Indigon or something like that, and you might be completely fine anyway. We'll have to wait and see. Flame Dash, Dash, Smoke Mine, so they're basically just nerfing all of these for their generation of charges a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a big deal at all. For some of these, I will say that the second wind support got changed to basically be useless. Yeah, don't think this was a great change for it. Basically, it's just still going to give you like one extra charge, but it costs a fuck ton more mana, and it instead reduces a bit of your cooldown recovery. I'm pretty much never going to use this thing again, as far as I can think. A lot of my builds, I just didn't even pick up my second wind, and I'd use Flame Dash or Dash just by itself, and it's completely fine for your 2 or 3 charges, and, you know, it didn't feel too bad, but second wind does make it feel a bit better. Nowadays, you won't really have the second wind, and you're going to have to be a bit more careful around your dash and flame dash sort of usage. So it's not really supposed to be designed anymore to help you just zoom across the map. So you're not just running and then dashing, run, dash, run, dash, run, dash, and just constantly zooming. It's a bit more of a defensive sort of get out of the way a couple of times skill and mechanic at this point. And I think that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. It's just a small effort to slow things down. And the Battle Royale that we just then played, I actually really liked having to think about my dash uses and having them be a bit more strategic. It felt horrible if someone else had a dash and you didn't, but at the same time, if you both had a dash, you'd have to be very kind of strategic about when you're using it and how you're using it, and that felt pretty damn good. I don't know if that's going to feel anywhere near as relevant in just PvE stuff, but in the PvP stuff, it felt nice. In any case, I think that's an okay change still. Arcane Surge, now it's just increased mana regen instead of a percent of mana. So for some builds that stack huge amounts of mana, and that percent mana was a big deal, they're going to feel a bit of pain here. But for most of our builds, I just use it as a bit of a buff or something. It shouldn't be too bad. It doesn't increase cast speed anymore, so it's just a bit of a more damage multiplier, a bit of mana regen. Should still be okay as just an afterthought. And yeah, so some people hate it, but shouldn't affect a lot of people. Fortify effect. Now this does seem like it hurts, but I honestly think that almost no one does this. I don't know, maybe you can prove me wrong, but it's the Fortify effect. So there's plenty of cases where you can stack your Fortify effect higher and higher to make Fortify just give you an absurd amount of damage reduction, especially if it's up full time. And you can see that in the Zizzaran Gauntlet races. Some of the top dudes are doing this sort of thing, and it helps them mitigate some insane damage from those bosses, considering the Gauntlet modifiers. I don't think too many people are doing this. It's a very HC, try not to die, try to take almost a zero damage sort of mentality. I've personally never really done almost any of this. It's just capping it to a point where it still works, but it won't just go over the top. And I've done a little bit of it, and I think that'll still be completely fine the way I do it. And I don't think too many people go way over the top to the point where they're getting damn near immune to shit. So I don't think this would be a big deal, though yes, I know taking away our defenses, lame. I can't believe they'd do that. We're going to get one shot more. I just don't think it's relevant for most of us. In any case, damage over time multi, kind of just trying to take a bit of the power away from cluster jewels, since cluster jewels are the best way of getting your damage over time multi. They're still going to be the best way, but it'll just be slightly less impactful to not have a cluster immediately. So I don't know. I think that's okay. For the most part, the changes here, I haven't seen pure numerical values for it, but I think it'll be not the biggest deal for that. And in other news, they are putting the big damage over time multi-prefixes on your weapons as suffixes, so the high roll on your weapon is probably going to be a bit higher as a roll now, which is kind of cool. Veiled mods, so they are making the Veiled Chaos and Ashling a bit harder to utilize well. The Ashling change is a bit of a, I don't think it matters to have Ashling changed, because it is a very deterministic way of crafting, and it's a very high-end way of crafting. I personally did it I think I used 9 Ashlings throughout the entire Ultimatum League, and only 3 of them or so kind of mattered. I don't think it's a bad thing to really sort of say, yeah, that was maybe too good, let's get rid of it. But I do think it is a bit of a dumb change the way they've changed it, in that it's basically just turned into a bit of a gamble. So you're really only going to be doing it on items you don't have much investment in, don't care much about. So they're still going to let you add a veiled mod, but it's going to remove a mod. So it's going to annul something at the same time. So it's going to be ideal to do it on a something like this that has mana gained on kill, and maybe you're still trying to get another big mod on there, but at the same time you're hoping to get rid of one of the shittier mods. But chances are you're just going to have a few items that you pick up that you think, oh, maybe I could throw some Ashling on that. And it's going to be a bit of an afterthought, and just items you're not very invested in, like I said. I think removing it probably would have been fine. It was very powerful, but changing it this way seems, I don't know, it's kind of meh. And then there's some Veiled Chaos Orb stuff, which shouldn't affect almost anyone. Fucking none of us were doing it realistically. I found 5 Veiled Chaos Orbs or something, and they did nothing for me. But yes, the high-end crafting for that is slightly nerfed for some big conglomerate people. And then as far as some other changes are concerned, focus cooldown no longer expires while it's... So basically, focus... I like using it, not many people do, so it does seem like a bit of a weird nerf because it's not very well abused. But basically, focus just has less uptime now, which doesn't make the biggest difference in the end, since I only really need it for like that 4-second window during a boss or some shit. But it's no longer going off of cooldown when you first press it. So you got to wait for it to actually expire, and then the cooldown starts regenerating, which just gives you less uptime basically. Kind of sucks, but okay. Golem Elementalist no longer provides increased damage per golem. That's a bit lame. So ultimately, most of my golem-based Elementalists are just going to lose about 100% damage, which doesn't ruin it by any means. It does make the golem side of things way less tantalizing as an option, and just slightly worse overall. I think Elementalist still has plenty of viability and in a good place, especially with that one Ignite node that makes so many Ignite builds viable. But this was a bit of a rough nerf just for the overall viability of making it strong. I mean, ultimately, I think it's fine. Golem, like, I love my Elementalist, and honestly, if I was like just making characters to have them be powerful and played by myself, half my characters would be Elementalists. So it makes sense to have it slightly toned down, especially in the Golem side of the tree. I think it is very generically powerful, and it still will be, just less always wanting to take it. I think it'll still be a bit more niche. Raider Ascendancy, Rapid Assault no longer provides Onslaught effect. So that's just the first Onslaught node that you get Onslaught permanently, and then it's buffed by 50% with that. Bit of a weird change since they, you know, gave you that fairly recently. It's not too long ago that that actually got buffed. I think it's okay. They're just trying to tone things down a bit, and Raider's still going to be a very good Ascendancy overall, and I was thinking about making a Frenzy / phasing one myself already without doing the Onslaught path. I think it's still okay. I know people will be upset without the zoom, but it does make that node a little bit, or that path a little bit less desirable, but I think it's still got its place, and it shouldn't be the biggest deal to lose. Basically, like, all this really does is lose you 10 attack, cast, and movement speed, which, you know, that doesn't sound like the end of the world. And as well as that, you won't be able to get Onslaught from your Abyssal Jewels quite that easily anymore, so your Onslaught is going to have to come from things like a Raider, Flask's random uptime, so not 100% uptime, and maybe some other items, thus making Onslaught a bit more powerful, like, because it's harder to get. And that's just bringing it back to a world where it actually was pretty important to get Onslaught from certain items, and that just went away when everyone could get Onslaught pretty easily for a while. We'll see how that plays out, but I think that's not too bad as well. Spectral Shield Throw, its Threshold Jewel just got kind of reworked so that it's not mandatory. Instead, basically some of the Threshold got put into the skill itself, and that more or less just frees up a gem jewel slot for most of us. And the Threshold does something else, which is just more crit based, which, I don't know, pretty much no one's going to use, I think. And then these mechanics reduced in power since they were too strong. Fire Burst, absolutely, that was way too good for the current league that it was in. Hollow Palm, 40% more instead of 60% attack speed. It still does a fuck ton of extra actual damage, but you won't be quite as fast on the attack. I think that's okay. Most Hollow Palm builds are really strong, and they can afford to take a bit of a nerf, especially on the attack speed side of things, where that's where it was really shining. Vile Ground Slam, damage adjusted, changed to have enemy blah 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 instead of always stunning. Okay, whatever. Blade Blast had its area lowered, no longer unnerves on hit, had its area multiplier with its Blade Vortex increased to compensate, which is kind of funny because they compensated it with Blade Vortex a way no one's going to use it, and no one still uses it or will use it, I think, probably. Maybe I'll give it a test. But otherwise, Blade Blast, you know, slightly worse. I think it'll still be good, as far as I can tell, if that's the only change that's being made to it. Haven't seen the patch notes, no spoilers. And then some of the unarmed unique items and stuff will specify that they work with melee skills, just so you can't use all this bullshit with the new explosive concoction flask throwing thing. So they're planning ahead before that, since it was designed without those in mind. And then some buffs, actually, that, you know, a bit surprising, getting a few buffs here or there. The main buff to this league is 19 new skills, so that's a lot to play around with, and maybe some of them are OP, but some other buffs as well. In this case, Firestorm, once again, more damage at level 20, more damage from the first hit. Probably usable, still won't feel that great, and I'm sure there's some builds that can exist with it, but just a bit of extra numbers and stuff. It's kind of boring. We'll see. Traps, like I said, good stuff there, plenty of stuff. Shock Nova. Ring no longer deals 50% less damage. It now deals full damage, so enemies in the ring take twice as much damage. So that's a pretty big change. Shock Nova is actually fairly powerful, especially if built with lots of crit and shock scaling and stuff. So I think you can make some pretty meaty Shock Nova builds with that change. Explosive Arrow slightly buffed, which is pretty good. People make Bleed Explosive Arrow. I just made an Explosive Arrow that did actual just on-hit damage, and that makes it slightly better. So that's a pretty good change. Artillery Ballista I think is still going to be useless. Ice Storm just slightly buffed, but I think that's still going to be useless as far as I know. Body Swap, just radius buff. The last sort of movement totem build that I might still try is probably Body Swap, so I'll look into that. But yeah, it's not the biggest change, just some area. Spark has better damage for most people, unless you're like getting to level 40 gems, which you're not. But Spark, currently still pretty good. Why not even better? Just not that well played at the moment. Barrage for the actual bow stuff and wand stuff, slightly buffed, so pretty good. Can play it now, and it'll be even better. Stormburst, I tried that in the Gauntlet race, and I was really happy with Stormburst for totems, so I think a good Stormburst totem build with a bit of extra radius will feel pretty damn nice this league. Soren slightly increased, didn't really need it I don't think, but why not, just a little bit of an increase. Stormcall, 25% more damage. The only problem with that is you really need the Awakened Stormcall to unleash its true power, so it's kind of a high-end build, but it does do plenty of damage with this extra buff as well. Lightning Tendies, 100% more on the stronger pulses. I don't know. Standing still and channeling, especially the spellcaster, basically a death sentence in this game right now. We'll have to wait and see what the new league mechanic looks like, but if it's anything like the past two, standing still is a no-go, and Lightning Tendies is a no-go. Lightning Arrow, I think it's currently pretty good for clear and all that. Buffed, just the way it attacks as well as the way it shocks, so that's a pretty nice buff, and maybe you can even turn it into a good single target. So I don't know, that seems pretty cool, and bows get comparatively stronger when other things get nerfed because of some shit like that. Rolling Magma, just a bit more damage, fairly viable. Cold Frenzy Discharge, so I don't know, if it doesn't really do anything. Cold Frenzy Discharge, not much of a thing. Otherwise a slight nerf to the lightning. Split Arrow, slightly better. Split Arrow is a very good single target for bows when combined with Barrage, so that's a pretty nice little buff right here. And Flame Blast needs way more than this to be good, because it just feels bad. Channeling and getting the big blast and all that, and dying while doing it. A bit more spell damage probably won't change anything. So that's our Balance Manifesto. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Oh my god, I need a sip of water. So I'll come back with the patch note reading sometime later in the evening. Hopefully I have some good things to read and not just pure pain. We'll have to wait and see. Most of you have probably already seen. And look, I hope you're not too doom and gloom about the league and the patch notes and the nerfs and stuff. Yes, it's going to be a step back, but we get so many steps forward in so many leagues and expansions and whatever that we can afford to take a slight step back. If you're really unhappy about the changes, or you just don't like that we're not getting more and more and more, or nerfs suck and it's unfun, I mean, honestly, I think just give the game a shot. If it doesn't feel like it's at the speed that you want it to be, or you can't find any fun, then just take a break. Don't play it. I don't know, wait to see what's in the future, but it's just going to be a slightly different pace of game, slightly different focus on things, and I'm going to do the same. You know, if I play it and some things feel bad, and I'm going to be critical about it, I will say, hey, this didn't feel good, and that's, in the end, the feedback they need. Not to just say, hey, how dare you, this is wrong, you don't know what we need or don't need, try it out. See how it is. Play some builds, try some new skills, try and accept a different way of PoE instead of just pure zoom, even though I think there will still actually be a lot of zoom once things settle down. In any case, hope you guys enjoyed my little balance manifesto thing. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.